A boy walked into his classroom carrying a guitar case. Minutes later, one student lay dying, another held a gun, and chaos tore through the quiet halls of a Colorado high school. How did two teenagers plan a massacre under everyone's nose? And why did no one see it coming? This is the story of betrayal, manipulation, and a hero who gave his life to stop the unthinkable. The blood on the whiteboard was not a splatter, but a line, clean, deliberate, drawn by force rather than accident. It arched downward like the final stroke of a red pen, thickening as it slid, then falling, drop by drop, until it soaked into the laminate edge and vanished. Beneath it, a hand twitched just once, then stilled. Fingers curled inward as if reaching for something or someone already gone. The smell inside room 107 was heavy, a sharp, metallic tang mixed with the faint scent of pencil shavings and paper. Air that once carried quiet classroom chatter now hung motionless, filled with the residue of smoke and panic. The silence wasn't peaceful. It had weight, presence. The kind of silence that lingers after screaming stops too suddenly. It was 1:50 p.m. at STEM School Highlands Ranch, just 3 days before graduation. The gunshots came fast. First one, then another. Not erratic, controlled. One of the bullets tore through a shoulder and buried itself in the drywall near the projector. Another passed through a rib cage, leaving a clean, fatal exit. Chairs scraped the floor in every direction. A scream cut short. A body hit the tile with a sound more visceral than any textbook could describe. While chaos unfolded in seconds, the planning had taken months. Two shooters, Devon Erickson and Alec McKinney, both students, both known, both invisible in ways that matter most. Yet only one truly initiated the sequence. In crime analysis, there's rarely a single origin point. Instead, there's pressure, silent, compounding, ignored. Alec, born Maya, had long wrestled with gender identity, compounded by relentless bullying, isolation at home, and a disintegrating internal self. There were signs of dissociation, auditory hallucinations, and suicidal ideation. The writings on Alec's bedroom wall weren't decoration. They were a map of psychological erosion. Words repeated in loops, crossed-out names, cryptic symbols. A visual scream no one heard. Devon was different. Outwardly confident, occasionally charming, with a touch of cynicism that passed as wit among peers. Beneath that, though, was a desire for control masked as nihilism. He didn't want to disappear quietly. He wanted an audience. That distinction is critical. Devon wasn't simply drawn to violence, he was drawn to narrative, to staging. The act of scripting a massacre not only gave him control over others, but a structure for his own identity. In psychological terms, it wasn't impulsivity, it was dramaturgy, a performance. While Devon wrote out the plan, Alec carried the weight of it. The dynamic between them was textbook, the dominant and the submissive, the manipulator and the desperate. But it wasn't that simple. Alec believed, perhaps genuinely, that the violence would be the only way to make people feel what he had felt for years, ignored, mislabeled, erased. Not to kill, just to make pain visible. Devon's motives, however, were colder, more precise. He had envisioned a scenario where he would survive, subdued the real shooter, and emerge as the misunderstood hero, a savior carved from ashes. But the truth was far more blood-stained and tangled than any fantasy he had rehearsed. At the scene, officers found Alec first, on the floor, breathing fast, eyes wide, repeating fragments, sentences about voices, guilt, wanting to die. In his backpack, another loaded weapon. Devon was tackled and disarmed by students, one of whom, Kendrick Castillo, had already been shot twice. Kendrick had rushed the gunman without hesitation, pushing Devon against the wall. That act of defiance, in those few seconds, saved lives, and ended his own. What makes this case uniquely chilling is not just the violence. It is the choreography, the removal of the magnet on the door to disable the lockdown, the concealment of firearms inside a guitar case, the coded language, blobfish, gamer boat, used in months of messages exchanged between them, embedding intent inside humor. The boundary between joke and threat blurred until no one could tell which was which, until it was too late. The sound of footsteps running, the gun clicking, the air pressed against eardrums, a teacher's hand trembling as she reached for the intercom, the smell of burnt plastic, the blood sliding across linoleum. These are not fragments, they are echoes, and echoes don't vanish. They just wait for silence to return. There is a moment in every violent act when intent hardens into motion, when what was once a thought, shrouded in doubt, wrapped in uncertainty, becomes action. That shift, often invisible to outsiders, is what separates the haunted from the haunted maker. In the case of Alec McKinney and Devon Erickson, that moment came long before they stepped into room 107. It began in a basement, not the kind buried in darkness, but a finished one. Clean floors, pale walls, a safe tucked behind a closet door. Inside that safe were the tools: 4 firearms, loaded magazines, a revolver with a worn grip. They belonged to Devon's parents. He knew the code, or thought he did. In the end, it was an axe, not a password, that opened the door. The first crack in the veneer. Alec was there, watching, not stopping. He had already crossed a threshold that few understand until it's too late, the point where desperation folds into compliance. He said he didn't want to hurt anyone. He said the voices were louder that week. That when Devon looked at him and said, "We're really doing this," he didn't respond, just nodded. There is no justification in that. But there is context. Alec had been living inside a storm no one saw, the kind that doesn't shatter windows, but erodes from within. He had changed his name, told his classmates. Some listened, some laughed, others simply looked away. At home, he shared a roof with more than a dozen relatives, many of whom didn't call him by the name he had chosen. Most didn't notice when he stopped speaking altogether. He began to write things down, on paper, on walls, on himself. By the time he entered school that day, he no longer believed he was a person. He was an instrument. Devon, meanwhile, carried something else entirely. He wasn't broken. He was bitter. There is a dangerous distinction there. While Alec bent under the weight of identity and rejection, Devon turned outward. He blamed. He wanted attention, but not affection. Control, but not connection. He began constructing a version of reality where he could dictate not just the narrative, but the ending, where he would walk out of the smoke as the survivor, the misunderstood hero, the one who had tried to stop it, but couldn't. He rehearsed it, even filmed it. A fake hostage scenario in Alec's garage. A just-in-case. That's what separates manipulation from madness. Devon planned to survive. They called their plan Gamerboat. A code word, meaningless on its own. Embedded in Snapchat threads, whispered in the hall, buried under emojis. It was a secret shared between 2 people who no longer recognized themselves in the mirror. A game, they said. Just a joke. But the problem with such games is that eventually someone stops laughing. The days before the attack were surprisingly mundane. Alec attended classes. Devon joked in the cafeteria. Nothing seemed off except for the quiet. That kind of quiet, the deliberate kind, is easy to miss, but in retrospect, it's deafening. On the morning of May 7th, Alec packed a pink iPhone, a black binder, and a loaded handgun into his backpack. Devon carried the guitar case. Inside, a semi-automatic pistol and extra magazines wrapped in a towel. They met in the parking lot. Not rushed, not frantic. Just two boys walking toward a school they knew too well, carrying death in borrowed cases. One of them whispered something as they crossed the threshold. No one heard it. Once inside, they split. Alec went toward the classroom. Devon lingered near the office. It had been rehearsed. Who would say what, where to stand, when to draw. Alec said later that he thought Devon would back out, that at the last minute he'd come to his senses. But he didn't. Neither did Alec. That's the part most people don't understand. These moments are not explosive. They are slow, measured, like pulling thread through skin. The hallway was quiet. One classroom door clicked shut. Another opened. The magnet strip, a safety feature meant to allow quick lockdowns, was quietly removed. A small act, a necessary one. It sealed the room. At 1:50 p.m., Devon walked in. Alec followed. And then, the sound of intent turning into action. The first shot didn't sound like the movies. It was flatter, duller, more like a thick crack tearing through silence than a bang. For a second, no one moved. The brain doesn't accept gunfire in a classroom. Not right away. It wants to believe in something else, a slammed book, a prank, anything but what it is. Then came the second shot, louder, closer, followed by a scream that broke mid-word. Some students dropped instantly to the floor. Others froze. A few stood upright, blinking, as if their bodies hadn't yet caught up with what was happening. The teacher stumbled back, eyes wide, unable to comprehend the scene unraveling before her. The guitar case lay open by the door, lid flung aside like a cracked shell, and beside it, Devon Erickson stood gripping a pistol with both hands. His arms were shaking, but his aim wasn't. In the corner, Alec McKinney fumbled with his own weapon. He wasn't looking at anyone directly. His gaze moved between desks as though searching for a way out, or a reason not to continue. He later said it felt like watching someone else move through his body, pulling the trigger without permission. But that moment, it belonged to him. Kendrick Castillo saw it and ran. There's no rehearsal for sacrifice. No internal script that prepares a teenager to throw himself into the path of a bullet. Kendrick moved without hesitation. He lunged at Devon, arms out, body forward. Not to hurt, but to stop. To end what had just begun. He collided with Devon hard, sending the shooter back against the whiteboard. A loud crack of bone or board echoed through the room. Devon fired again. The bullet struck Kendrick in the chest. He dropped. Not backward, not cleanly. He crumpled forward, his body folding in on itself like something being pulled inward from the core. There was no scream, just the hard collapse of muscle and bone onto tile. It changed the room. Others moved. Brendan Bialy and Joshua Jones, driven by instinct more than thought, surged forward. Brendan tackled Devon. Josh went for the gun. There was another shot. No one remembers exactly when, and then the pistol slid across the floor, spinning, clattering into the far wall. Blood was spreading fast. It followed the grout lines between the tiles. It soaked into notebook paper, into backpacks, into the knees of those crouched beside Kendrick's body trying to stop the bleeding. His chest barely rose, then stopped. The smell of gunpowder faded quickly, replaced by the warm, iron-sweet scent of blood, the kind that fills the nose even when you try not to breathe. It mixed with fear, with sweat, with the sharp, plastic tang of cracked pencil cases. Every sound felt magnified. Footsteps outside, sobs muffled under desks, the beeping of a dropped phone still recording. Outside the classroom, police were breaching doors. Some broke windows to climb through. Others ran down hallways with weapons drawn, their boots thudding in rhythm with the adrenaline they couldn't afford to release. Inside room 107, it was chaos, screaming, crying, then silence again. Devon was on the ground, face down, arms behind his back. Brendan's voice, calm, low, cut through the panic. He was telling the others what to do, to stay down, to breathe, to move away from the gun. His shirt was streaked with blood. Not his. Alec didn't run. He walked into the hallway, still holding the second firearm. His steps were uneven. He placed the gun on the floor when confronted by a security officer, raised his hands, said nothing. Later, during interrogation, Alec would speak in fragments, about voices, about guilt, about how everything felt distant. He described the sensation not as fear, but as coldness, as if the part of him that cared had gone quiet. Devon, in contrast, tried to talk his way out. He insisted it was all Alec, that he was coerced, that he was a victim. But the evidence told another story. In Alec's phone, investigators found footage, grainy, low light, of Devon directing a mock confession. Alec, on camera, shaking. Devon behind the lens, controlling the scene. It wasn't a game. It was insurance. A narrative in the making. Back in the classroom, paramedics arrived minutes too late to save Kendrick. His body was carried out on a stretcher wrapped in a white sheet. His blood had stained the floor in the shape of his outstretched arms, as if, even in death, he was still trying to hold back the violence. Some students never returned to that building. Others came back but avoided that hallway. The school replaced the floors, repainted the walls, replaced the doors, but the memory remained, in the silence between class bells, in the quiet footsteps of students who now glanced over their shoulders more often than they used to. What began as a plan, structured, intentional, written in code, ended in that room. Not with a resolution, but with ruin. Not with noise, but with the quiet that follows it. The kind of quiet that stays. In the hours that followed, the building stood in a kind of arrested time. The students were gone. The bodies removed. The blood wiped from the floor, though faint outlines remained, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Outside, a growing crowd of parents stood behind yellow tape, their hands trembling, their eyes scanning every face that emerged from the wreckage. Some called out names. Some whispered prayers they hadn't used in years. Inside, investigators moved slowly, carefully, like stepping through the last breath of something sacred. The silence was almost reverent, not out of respect, but out of weight, as if the air itself had thickened under the gravity of what had been done there. Room 107 was photographed from every angle, bullet casings marked and collected, blood patterns examined. A small pile of notebooks lay soaked near the center of the room, pages curled inward from the weight of what had soaked them. One had a doodle of a rocket ship in the corner. Another, a math problem never finished. The investigators weren't strangers to crime scenes, but this one was different. There was something in the way the violence sat, not as rage, not even as chaos, but as calculation. Cold, measured, carried out not in a moment of fury, but in fulfillment of something planned. At the center of that plan was control. Devon had carefully crafted a dual narrative, one that cast himself as both perpetrator and potential victim. In one version, he survived and claimed he had been manipulated. In another, he died in a blaze of infamy. Both outcomes gave him what he craved most: centrality, to be noticed, to be seen, even if it meant turning the classroom into a stage. He didn't die. In the interrogation room, he sat upright, answering questions with calm precision. He talked about Alec as if recalling a dream, disconnected, clinical. He insisted he never meant for anyone to get hurt. But the messages told a different story: the stockpile of ammunition, the choice of room, the effort to disable the lockdown mechanism. These were not mistakes. They were design. Alec, on the other hand, was unraveling. During his interview, he kept glancing toward the corner of the room, eyes twitching like he was listening to something no one else could hear. His words came out broken, interrupted by long pauses. When asked why, he didn't say revenge. He didn't say hatred. He said nothing at all for nearly a full minute. Then he whispered, barely audible, that he just wanted it all to stop. There is a psychological term for what Alec displayed: dissociative detachment, the slow erosion of self-perception when trauma is allowed to fester without outlet. Over time, it can create a division between thought and action, between person and pain. Alec wasn't born violent. He became numb. And numbness, in certain contexts, is far more dangerous than anger. In a different life, Alec might have been treated, might have been heard. In this one, he was weaponized, by neglect, by identity rejection, and by someone who saw in him not a friend, but a tool. That relationship between the two boys was never equal. Devon dictated the pace, the tone, the terms. He framed the outcome. He rehearsed the lies. Alec followed. Not because he wanted to, but because, by the time he realized he didn't, it was already too late to leave. The plan had momentum. Back in the classroom, forensic analysts reviewed every object left behind. One of the handguns still had a fingerprint smudged in blood. A backpack had the initials DE scrawled in black marker. Near the doorway, a pair of glasses crushed underfoot. No one claimed them. Later that week, the school board held a meeting. Officials spoke about policy changes, mental health resources, armed guards. But no one mentioned Kendrick by name until a student stood up, voice shaking, and said that a hero had died. Not a victim, not a number, a person, someone who saw the danger and stepped into it anyway. Kendrick Castillo was 18. He was set to graduate that Friday. Instead, his name was etched into a plaque mounted just outside the robotics lab he helped build. Visitors walk past it every day now, often without noticing. But for those who do, there's a silence that follows. The kind that doesn't ask to be filled. The kind that lingers. Not all violence screams. Some of it just waits. Beneath the surface, breathing slowly, until someone finally looks. Grief, when it settles over a place, doesn't announce itself with sirens. It creeps in after the noise has faded, after the reporters leave, after the vigils are extinguished, after the chairs are realigned in rooms that were once crime scenes. It takes the shape of routines disrupted, of glances exchanged but never spoken, and, in schools, it lingers in the sound of pencils scratching paper, in the way lockers are opened a little more quietly, in the soft apologies whispered by those who didn't know what else to say. In the days after the shooting, STEM School Highlands Ranch reopened under new rules, new signs, new locks, but the same air, the same hallways, the same faint indentation on the tile outside room 107, where Kendrick's body had fallen. The floor had been scrubbed, recoated, But some marks don't lift. Counselors were brought in. Assemblies held. There were speeches about resilience, safety, unity. But they floated above the real wounds, the kind students carried home at the end of the day, the kind that woke them up at night. Some transferred out. Others dropped classes. One student, seated in the back of the room when the shots were fired, stopped speaking altogether for nearly 3 weeks. Outside the school, parents began asking questions that had no easy answers. How did Devon access the guns? Why wasn't the safe secure? Who knew Alec had been crying for help long before this? And what happens when 2 children decide no one is listening? There's something fragile about community grief. It wants to find blame, because blame gives it shape. But the truth, messier, harder, is that sometimes the damage begins long before the trigger is pulled. In Alec's home, there were 14 people living under one roof. The noise, the tension, the chaos. It created a silence around him, one that no one seemed to notice until it broke. He had expressed suicidal thoughts as early as middle school, written notes, changed his name, told teachers he didn't feel safe. He wasn't ignored entirely, he was simply misunderstood, misread. People saw sadness and assumed it would pass. They didn't see the fracture widening underneath. Devon had fewer outward signs. He performed the role of a student convincingly, smiled, made jokes, wrote songs, but beneath that was a bitterness that had been cultivated, not concealed. He believed the world owed him something, and if it wasn't going to be given, he would take it, even if it cost other people their lives. The investigation unearthed things that painted a clearer picture. Snapchat messages where the 2 planned details weeks in advance, references to Columbine, mentions of martyrdom. But what stood out most were the subtle moments. Devon's suggestion to remove the magnetic door strip. Alec's hesitation the morning of the attack when he stood outside the school for a long time before walking in. Tiny fractures. That grew into something lethal. Neither of them expected Kendrick. In every mass casualty event, there is someone whose name outlasts the shooters. Kendrick Castillo became that name, not because he wanted it, but because he chose something impossible, to run forward, to shield others with nothing but his own body. There is no training for that. It is instinct, born of something deeper, something most people never need to access. His parents still visit the site. They walk the halls quietly, sometimes invited to speak, other times just to remember. They've said they don't hate Devon or Alec. That hate only gives weight to the wrong name. They speak Kendrick's instead. And every time they do, the silence shifts. Not gone, but changed. The court proceedings were long. Alec, because he was 16, was treated as a juvenile at first, then charged as an adult. He pled guilty to all counts. Life in prison plus 38 years. Devon, who maintained his innocence, went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. 46 charges. Guilty, life without parole, plus 1,282 years. But justice is quieter than people think. It doesn't restore the lost. It doesn't erase the noise. It just draws a line under what can no longer be undone. And still, the school stands. Morning bells still ring. Students still laugh in the hallways, sometimes too loud, sometimes not enough. New students arrive each year, unaware of the history buried beneath their feet. But those who remember, remember in silence, in narrowed eyes when a locker slams, in frozen posture when a loud sound breaks the rhythm of a normal day. Some of them still flinch, not because they're weak,
but because they survived something no one should ever have to measure strength against.